forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is in session.
Messages from His Excellency the President. Announcements by Your Honor, the President.
Minutes of our meeting held on the 3rd December 2025 for confirmation. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes of our meeting held on Wednesday, December 3rd, 2025 be confirmed at this time.
The question is that the minutes of our meeting held on December 3rd, 2025 be confirmed. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Those minutes are confirmed. Our minutes of Friday, 19th of December 2025. Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes of February 19th of December be deferred at this time.
The question is that the minutes of our meeting held on Friday, December 19th, 2025 be deferred. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Since the ayes have it, those minutes are accordingly deferred. The other announcements have indications of late arrival from Senator Monique Tate.
Presentation of petitions. Presentation of papers. Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate moved by minister.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 and 22-1 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Standing Orders 45-2 and 22-1 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Accordingly, the operation of those standing orders is suspended for the remainder of today's sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the following resolutions. A resolution to rescind a resolution passed by the Honorable the House of Assembly on the 19th day of July 2022 and the Honorable the Senate on the 10th day of August of the same year 2022 and published in the Official Gazette as Resolution Number 17, 2022 on the 18th day of August to approve the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of 2 parcels of land situate at Sergeant's Village in the parish of Christchurch in the island for a public purpose, namely housing development. And secondly, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Cap 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the state, situate at Sergeant's Village in the parish of Christchurch in this island for housing development. Mr. President, I also beg to move the first reading of the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2026.
The question is, on the Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2026 be read a first time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Accordingly, that bill is read a first time.
Public business, sir.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 6, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the House and the Senate to move the second reading of the Tourism Levy Amendment Bill 2025.
Senator, the Honorable Lisa Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise on this occasion to speak on a specific matter, but before we get into the actual business of today's sitting, this being our very first sitting for the year, I want to take the opportunity to welcome all honorable senators back into the chamber and to wish everyone a happy and a prosperous 2026. And I look forward to maintaining the camaraderie, even in an environment where sometimes we don't have the same views, but that has always characterized our engagements in this chamber. And so, Happy New Year to the members of the Senate from the government side of the Senate. Now, this legislation before us, Mr. President, is called the Tourism Rate Levy Bill, and so we're making some changes here. It is specifically the long form Tourism Levy Amendment Bill for 2025. What is the purpose of this piece of legislation? The Barbados Revenue Authority, as we know, is the tax authority for the state. They administer all matters relating to tax. And so in 2018, when a number of levies were introduced, we had the Tourism Levy Bill introduced and then becoming the Tourism Levy Act. Now, what were those new levies as they were introduced? We had in the first instance the room rate levy. That was tiered based on the category and the type of room. I'll get into that in a minute. You had the product development levy. That spoke to direct tourism services, and I'll get into the details of that in a moment. And there was also the shared economy levy, Mr. President. I'll get into those details in a minute. And so, Mr. President, when combined, those three levies constitute the architecture of the Tourism Levy Bill. That's what we are here to make amendments to today. The levy itself remains, Mr. President. There are no new taxes being introduced by this bill. Let me say that again. There are no new taxes being introduced by this bill. These taxes have been in place since 2018, as they will be defined very shortly, Mr. President. Now, the sector that we are referring to is the tourism sector. Now, why would we be making changes to the tourism sector in this way? Let me start first by saying, Mr. President, that very often Barbadians see tourism as this abstract thing that would bring strange persons, overseas visitors to the country. They come and they stay in fancy hotels or expensive villas. They come and they stay in shared accommodation. They get embedded in the community. They know Barbadians. They go to shops, bars, and expensive restaurants. But altogether, it constitutes tourism. Historically, when we see a hired car whiz past us, back in the day as I was growing up, you used to see the mini molks. Now they've got these really modern takes on mini molks, but with tourists that are driving down the way and they're sunning, their faces are red, but they're enjoying the sun, especially in the winter months of the year. Mr. President, tourism pays this country's bills. Let's start there. The tourism industry and all of its parts, it pays this country's bills. It is what generates the largest source of revenue for this country. How is it financed, Mr. President? I want to spend a moment talking about how it is financed. One of the ways in which we finance the tourism sector, Mr. President, is by levies like this. This particular levy here, Mr. President, allows for the government, through the Barbados Revenue Authority, to pour money back into a number of things relating to the sector. I'll get into that in a minute. There are two other agencies that are important in here, Mr. President. The Barbados Revenue Authority, as I've said, takes authority for tax administration. The Barbados Tourism Management, Inc., BTMI, takes responsibility for marketing. The annual budget of the BTMI is $75 million every year. That does not come from taxpayer monies, Mr. President. It does not come from central government's budget, Mr. President. It comes through the levying of the airport service charge at the Grantley Adams International Airport, paid by visitors to the country. If that amount is $75 million in total in a given year, that amount is remitted to the Barbados Tourism Marketing, Inc. If that money is in excess of $75 million in a year, $75 million goes to BTMI and the excess goes into the consolidated fund and is spent on national expenses, Mr. President. But there is a $75 million annual budget for the BTMI. What does the BTMI do with those monies? It engages in behind the gateway marketing. It engages in negotiations with the airlines. It engages in all of the development and the product development services that support the country's tourism sector. We are that country, Mr. President, that still has a national marketing agency, just like most other countries, and we pour a significant amount of resources annually from that airport service charge into the Tourism Marketing, Inc. Equally, Mr. President, there are facilities that allow for hotels, especially, and direct tourism services to have access to financing. So yes, you can go to a bank, Mr. President, you can go to a bank and you have a banking relationship with your bank, your financial institution, and you may borrow money to invest in your tourism product. But there is also, Mr. President, the hotel, especially for small hotels, the Small Hotel Investment Fund under the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited. Those monies are made available, especially to small indigenous hotels in this country, to be able to invest in product development. Now, why am I speaking about those things, Mr. President? Because a sector that pays our bills always has to have the benefit of a constant refreshing. But, Mr. President, over time, the sector has changed. Once upon a time, you used to go onto a hotel website, or you used to go through a travel agent, and you would book a hotel, you book a flight. Now, everything is done digitally. You have Airbnb, you have HomeAway, you have the shared accommodation sector, as it is called, and it's digitally structured. Barbados also now has arguably, and those who are more vested and currently up to date with what is happening in the sector than I would be, would tell you that there are probably more Airbnb and shared economy rooms on this island than there are hotel rooms, Mr. President. It is in excess of the hotel stock in this country. Yes, we have significant infrastructure going in now, and that is necessary, but there is a vast shared economy sector in this country that is digital. You can go, Mr. President, on your computer, your phone, your iPad, your tablet, whatever the device is, and there you can find on most of these digital platforms any number of types of places that you can stay. Now, I'll tell you a true story, Mr. President. This is a true story. In March of last year, we had a major international conference here in the energy sector. And we had the hotel rooms. There were 1,900 people at the time attending that conference that we needed to make sure were accommodated. We had the hotel rooms, yes, but we needed additional capacity from shared economy. One day, one of my staff members came to me and said, "Minister, we have a problem." What's the problem? The problem is that we have one of our guests who has booked a beachfront or 5 minutes walk away from the beach property on Airbnb, and we need to move them. Why do you need to move them? Because what was being marketed as an Airbnb and shared economy was in what was to Barbadians known as a red light district, but the way in which it was presented online, they had no idea where they were actually beach booking. And now, one of my colleagues is here saying that they had two last week. They don't know where it is they're actually booking. It is marketed on these platforms as if it is steps away from the beach and one of the most iconic beaches in the country. And it is. And it is. All of that is true. All of that is true. But we know the difference. They don't know. So the question of always maintaining standards, but most importantly, the brand integrity of Barbados, and making sure that people are, if they choose to stay in those locations, that is a choice that we want them to make consciously. but not because you genuinely did not know. So the development of products and the accurate marketing of the jurisdiction is important to Barbados. So let me start with what the legislation actually does. When this legislation was passed in 2018, the intention was to be able to apply these various levies in the way that I have just described to the types of accommodation and direct tourism services that I have just described, and then to be in a position through the Barbados Revenue Authority to reinvest in the tourism sector. What ended up happening was that there were a number of things that were misaligned, and I want to go through what there were. The Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc., for example, attempted in its engagements with and platforms like Airbnb and so on to rationalize the product marketing to make sure that you were able to collect the revenue paid into these platforms as part of the payment of the levy. They had no basis to do so because there needed to be changes to the legislation. There was a question about collection inefficiencies that was raised. So here are some of the issues that we found, Mr. President. I'm going to start first by going through the legislation. The legislation has a number of amendments that it proposes, and I want to take us through them one by one before coming back to the macro big picture. In the first instance, Mr. President, there was a need to clarify the levy base. What was amount paid? How do we navigate amount paid? The amendment then replaces the term cost with amount paid in the third schedule as it relates to the product development levy, and in the fourth schedule as it relates to the shared economy levy. This ensures that the levy is calculated on the total amount being paid by the purchaser, inclusive of platform fees. And why is that the case, Mr. President? If I go and I pay for a room at $150 per night, then I'm receiving that, I'm not receiving that full amount from the guest. If I'm booking on Airbnb or those places, the platform is going to claim a percentage of that $150 per night. And so the ambiguity that was being presented was that persons who were owners and operators of these facilities were paying the levy as calculated, not on the total amount, but on the amount remitted to them after what was paid to the digital platform had been remitted. And so the collection was underestimated. This change aligns with the internationally recognized consumption tax principles, and it now attempts to look at the online and shared economy platforms in a way that removes ambiguity. Secondly, it attempts to include now in these changes online marketplaces and marketplace facilitators in the domestic regime. And so the Act attempts now, the Act introduces definitions for what is a marketplace facilitator and what is an online marketplace, and explicitly extends the levy regime to the persons who are operating those platforms. Equally, it also is consistent now, in my own wheelhouse, under the Companies Act of Barbados, it now is consistent with the regulatory approaches in the related legislation, like that legislation, where they are mandated to register both with the Barbados Tourism Product Authority, that manages the product, the condition of the product, as well as the Barbados Revenue Authority. This ensures compliance, monitoring, and integrates facilitators into the tax administration system. It then speaks to an amendment in Section 10, which requires marketplace facilitators who process payments on their platforms to include applicable levies in the price charge and remit those levies directly to the BRA. We've spoken to that already. Mandatory registration and enhanced bookkeeping. Providers and facilitators must register. It is a registration process, and it brings everyone into compliance now. Price transparency, also ensuring that what you are advertising and what is being quoted is what is being charged. It is about protecting the brand as well. And then the alignment of the payment periods with the value-added tax regime. What we have tried to do as a government is to make sure that our tax reporting standards are made coherent. We know that there's a certain time of the year companies' tax is navigated. We know there's a certain time of the year that income tax is calculated. And so we want to make sure that there is a coherent approach to how these levies are being collected under this legislation. I want to look at a couple of comparisons for our purposes, just for analytical purposes. I want us to have just a moment. There's been a lot of conversation about whether or not Barbados is comparable, competitive to other jurisdictions. The Barbados Revenue Authority took the time to look at what happens in other jurisdictions also functioning as tourism-driven economies. In the case of Barbados, you have the VAT on the one hand. The VAT is levied in some instances between 7.5% and 10%. In Barbados, in addition to the VAT, you have the room rate levy, the ones that I have just called, the shared economy levy, and the product development levy. In Jamaica, one of the largest tourism economies in the region, they have what they call the GCT, the General Consumption Tax. There, it is between 10% and 15%. In addition, they also have a room tax and a tourism enhancement fee. So they're also contributing to a product development provision. In the Bahamas, again, one of the largest jurisdictions in the region for tourism, VAT is calculated there at 10%, and in addition to that, there is a resort levy that also varies by classification, just like the room rate levy in Barbados also varies by classification. So Barbados's approach in this tourism levy, Mr. President, is entirely consistent with what other jurisdictions are doing. I want then to get into the specifics of how the various rooms are classified in the room rate levy. In the room rate levy, you have apartments, you have guest houses, you have hotels, you have vacation rentals. In some instances, Mr. President, as at 2019 and 2020, and yet into 2019, there's a tiered system that varies between $5 per bedroom per night up to $11 per bedroom per night. And if you are in the vacation rental property, it is a 2.5% levied on the bedrooms per night. And so that's where we are, Mr. President, with this particular levy. I promised that I was going to get into the specifics of how the levies are charged. The room rate levy, specifically, Mr. President, is payable by guests, just like the airport service charge is payable by visitors according to the type, and it ranges from $2.50, like I just said, up to $10 per bedroom per night. The product development levy on island tours, non-international cruises, meals, drinks, and dining services, food and services provided by spas, retreats, and marinas, these are also calculated at a 2.5% applicable. Now, how many of us have gone to restaurants for dinner? You take your wife or your friends and you go to celebrate a birthday or some kind of celebratory event, and you see your bill. When you look at your bill, you're going to see your bill, what is the total amount of the services that you have consumed, what is the applicable value-added tax. Then the restaurant is going to charge you, in some instances, their service charge. That just goes to them, and they split that among their employees, and then you will see the product development levy sometimes on the bill, and that is levied specifically on meals, drinks, and dining services. And it is also levied on food and services provided by spas, retreats, and marinas. The sharing economy levy is also applicable specifically now for tourism accommodation, but this is where the digital economy that I just talked about is relevant. This is levied at 10%. But here's what is important, Mr. President. I want to put these words on the record. A sharing economy levy introduced with effect from August 1, 2018 at a rate of 10% on the cost of tourism economy accommodation supplied through digital platforms such as Airbnb and HomeAway by persons who are not registered for VAT or are VAT exempt. This measure targets the growing short-term rental segment and was designed to ensure tax equity across all modes of accommodation. So it is now applicable in this way that we have just described to the category that I have just listed on purpose, Mr. President. So these are the matters that are being navigated in this piece of legislation. It is really about managing the tax collection process. And when I say, Mr. President, managing the tax collection process, I want to give us some numbers. I would not have come here today to say that tourism pays our bills, even though I know we all know it academically. We know it because we've been members of the Senate for long enough. We've done enough estimates of expenditure. We've all read central bank reports. But I want to then show just how these levies have contributed to the mobilization of revenue to support the tourism sector. In 2021, Mr. President, the total receipts from tourism levies amounted to 9.63 million. Now, we knew what was happening immediately after COVID, and so that was the post-recovery, first recovery year. In financial year 2022 to 2023, total revenue increased to 25.41 million, with the highest quarterly collections recorded in Q1, which is usually the winter period. This represented a 169.3% increase over the previous year. And so this was a clear indication for anybody who wants to say that Barbados did not recover in the post-pandemic period that we saw this increase. By 2023-2024, Mr. President, total revenue rose by $41.41 million, representing a 62.9% increase over the previous year. And by 2024-2025, revenue also saw a further 2.8% increase over the previous year, and that has continued to increase into this year, year to date, at a rate of over 3.4%. So, Mr. President, that these levies are being collected and that these funds, by way of revenue, are then fed into the Barbados Revenue Authority. We are going into a period, actually we are in already, a period of estimates. Right now, every year, this is nothing new, we have the annual estimates of expenditure. And there's inevitably the conversation about where is this money coming from? Is it being domestically generated? Is the country producing enough revenue to match its expenditure? Is the country only borrowing to be able to have the revenue for expenditure? This is an example, Mr. President, of how this country pays our bills. And what are those bills, Mr. President? When we want roads fixed, and for all the persons, including myself, who want to see the roads fixed, this is how we pay our bills. When we want to be able to see social services expanded, this is one of the ways in which we pay our bills. It's not just debt. It's not just grant financing. It is by revenue through growth sectors and productive sectors like the tourism sector, Mr. President, that we pay our bills for the very things that we ask for. So, Mr. President, I'm always very confused when I hear people attacking the tourism sector. Now, there are always going to be legitimate questions that people will raise, and I accept that. I actually encourage that because that's important. But when we attack a sector that allows us to put money in education, to put money in health, to put money in schools, to put money in social services, and to put money into welfare services, Mr. President, that I never understand. That I never understand. This sector pays our bills. The tourism levy has been generating revenue to contribute to that revenue raise that helps to pay our bills, Mr. President. And so the intention of the bill before us is to enhance fiscal space for investment in tourism product development, digital transformation, destination marketing. Mr. President, Barbados has mirrored and has expanded its overseas presence in overseas marketing and behind the gateway marketing in leaps and bounds since 2018, despite a pandemic intervening in between. Mr. President, when we first came to office, Barbados's overseas offices existed, and they were advertising and they were marketing behind the gateway. We have expanded that. We now have destination marketing in Panama. And with that destination marketing in Panama, I don't know how many of us have seen the number of Barbadians that are traveling to Panama on a regular basis for a vacation because it's a new destination that has a direct flight on Copa Airlines right here from Barbados. I don't know how many of us have seen how many Barbadians are traveling from Barbados to Panama to go and shop these days, Mr. President. I don't know how many people have noticed that there are a number of people traveling from Barbados to Panama, down into Central America. And I'm even told, Mr. President, that despite the significant increase in U.S. airlift, there are a lot of people who are price sensitive who are taking a flight from here to Panama and from Panama to Miami or somewhere else in the United States. There is a significant expansion in destination marketing. And we're seeing that, Mr. President, with the location of a Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. in Panama. We're seeing that also, Mr. President, with the expansion of the work of the BTMI in Europe. We have an expansion in the work being done in Brussels. We now have a presence, not a physical office, but representatives in Paris, in France, Mr. President. We have been seeing Barbados for the first time forging new relationships through the UN World Tourism Organization, with the Emirates as well, and we have seen the explosion in the cruise industry trade. All of that, Mr. President, is a part of destination marketing. I remember, Mr. President, and this is an interesting part of the conversation, I remember, Mr. President, having a conversation, let me put it that way, a conversation, calling for meetings of the cruise sector. Now, I admit, for me, I'm always going to think, what is the business of the thing? And for me, when I looked at the tourism sector, when I was chairman of the port, what is the business of cruise was what occupied my thought process. And so when you study the structure of the cruise industry, I started to think, but hold on, we got to consider how we're doing this thing, and we got to make some tweaks. It was on that basis, Mr. President, that subsequently, as Minister of Tourism, I made the decision to shift and to expand Barbados' presence in Miami. We no longer now just have a consulate general in Miami, but we have a BTMI office in Miami. And why, Mr. President? What is the business of cruise? What's the business of cruise? The cruise sector is heavily vertically integrated. Chances are, a year before that cruise ship pulls up in the Bridgetown port, 90% of the tours and experiences that the passengers on that ship are going to undertake in the given destination have been booked at the time of the sale of the cruise. That is the report coming out of the cruise sector analytics information. That's what they tell you, Mr. President. 90%, you know it was 90% of all cruise passengers having booked their travel and booked their tours and arrangements in a given destination at the time a year before. So we made the decision that in consideration of the business of cruise, we needed to move our destination marketing closer to where the cruise operations are hubbed, so that we can integrate Barbados' destination marketing with the travel tour operators at source. We did the same thing, Mr. President, by approaching the cruise sector originating in Southampton. That is the work of the Barbados Tourism Marketing, Inc. That is the work of destination marketing, and that is what our professionals are doing. And I want to take a moment to say this. 2018, 2019, 2023, 2024, 2025, the professionals operating in our overseas gateways, engaging in destination marketing, they may have moved around, but they remain the same outstanding professionals who have served this country well for the last several years. Every one of them, from the officers in New York, in the BTMI office in New York, to those in Canada, in Toronto, to those now in Miami, to those in London, Mr. President, to those in Europe in our Brussels office, those are the same officers. Actually, they have spanned both administrations historically, and they have been exceptional professionals. They have really been exceptional professionals. They have been on the front line of destination marketing for Barbados. And they want to make sure, I am certain, that tourism product development on island is able to benefit from significant increases in investment, and that everyone entering the space, whether it is a new hotel, if it is an Airbnb, if it is an apartment or a vacation rental, if it is in a shared economy, that it represents brand Barbados. And it also, in this bill, is meant to ensure that we can demonstrate the value of sector-specific revenue instruments. This is very much a sector-specific revenue instrument. This is generated from the tourism sector for the tourism sector, and it is aligned with Barbados' sustainable growth priorities, Mr. President. So those are the issues that the bill attempts to address. This is what it is attempting to accomplish. And these are the amendments before this honorable chamber. And with these few words, I beg to move that this bill is read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummings. Senator Ryan Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning to you and my fellow senators. Happy New Year to all. Wishing you all the best in 2026 to you and your families. Mr. President, I was expecting a more elaborate and robust presentation from the former Minister of Tourism, who seems to have buckled based on this government's performance in tourism. Not a lot to shout about at all, and clearly she is not seeking parliamentary office, so she would be more timid than some of the other members in this chamber. But Mr. President, the bill seeks to collect revenue, or the appropriate amount of revenue based on what was said by the leader of government business. In other words, persons are underpaying the government, and this bill seems to address that. Now, this gives me the opportunity to qualify my previous statement of this government's poor performance in tourism. Like with everything else in Barbados in 2018, residents got a beating with more taxes. Residents got a beating with national insurance written off. And the tourism sector also got a beating, as was alluded before, just presented in a different way. There were a slew of taxes to those that visited Barbados. And as identified in 2018 budget, there was a tourism development tax, there was an introduction of a room levy or tax, the product development tax, and the shared economy tax, Mr. President. In other words, it cost a person wishing to visit Barbados more to come here, not only in travel and accommodation, but in eating, drinking, and sightseeing. There is a relationship between the cost of travel and if persons come to Barbados. We are in a competitive environment, so we must not believe that because it is a person wishing to come to an island for a vacation that they have the wherewithal to pay any amount of money to come to any destination. We all travel, or most of us travel, and we have to budget, we have to save. I think we need to see the visitor more in that light, Mr. President. A person that wants to come to Barbados, that will save to bring their family to Barbados. Everyone is not wealthy, Mr. President. So the imposition of a slew of taxes will cause some persons to make other decisions. And we have seen some of that based on the numbers that are presented here. In the terms of overnight, stay overnight visitors to the country. But before we get into that, I just want to mention quickly, Mr. President, that Barbadians are very concerned with the level of taxation in the country. And I want to just share that in 2018, when this government assumed office, they moved to introduce new taxes that will allow the government to collect additional revenues. And the tourism development tax was one of those taxes, Mr. President. What it meant is that the government was now collecting this tax at the airport, not only from visitors, Mr. President, but from all travelers. So even Bajans have to pay, I think it's around US $35 every time they travel. So this tax, Mr. President, was collected, and that meant that the government would not have to send a subvention to the Barbados Tourism Marketing, Inc., which gives the government, or gave the government over the last 7 years, more space to do things on behalf of the people of Barbados. They also introduced, Mr. President, the garbage and sewage tax, which would have financed the operation at the sanitation service, which gave the government, Mr. President, more space, more money to spend on social services and the social infrastructure in this country. But 7 years down the road, everybody is still crying out for the state of our schools, the state of our roads, the state of our welfare department, and even, Mr. President, the introduction of the health services levy, which raises at least $90 million a year, reduced the subvention to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital or to the Ministry of Health, Mr. President. So Bajans are wondering what is really happening with all of these tax dollars that are being collected by this government. But that is impossible, Mr. President. Mr. President, the former Minister of Tourism, and she did not once mention that she was the former minister. At least I didn't hear that. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I thought you were too ashamed of your record. I thought you were too ashamed of your record. But Mr. President, the reality is that 6 years on, this government is now achieving the levels of visitor arrivals to this country after 6 years in office. They came to office with a well-managed and run tourism authority, tourism ministry. Year-on-year increase in arrivals, year-on-year steady growth in tourist spend. The records are there, Mr. President. And you have a situation now where it took them 7 years just to get a 3.8% increase in arrivals. That is not success, Mr. President. It is not. We are significantly behind the rest of the Caribbean. But even without mentioning the Caribbean, this is not acceptable for a government that boasts about moving Barbados forward. Mr. President, the reality is that the government has done nothing substantial to increase the visitor arrivals in this country. And I'll tell you what they did. They paid influencers to come to the country. So they pay influencers to come here, free accommodation, free meals, free transportation, and that is all in those numbers. They paid for airlines to bring empty seats here, and we know for a fact that Cayman Airlines Airways, Mr. President, is an example of one of those arrangements that failed, that lasted less than a year. Mr. President, you have a situation where outside of the tourist season, the government has not grown the traffic coming to Barbados. They have not. And these are the facts. But the government will not speak to the reality of the situation that we are 7 years on. They have been the government for 7 years, and they have not moved the needle. In 2018, Mr. President, in 2018, between the months of May and August, stay-over visitors to this island totaled 206,225 visitors. In 2023, Mr. President, after COVID, 2 years after COVID, that number was 174,999, below 2018. Mr. President, in 2024, That number was 196,916 visitors, below the 206,225 visitors in 2018 between May and August 2018. So that is why the former minister did not take long to go through step by step the performance of this government in tourism. They have now surpassed this number in 2025, only last year, Mr. President, by a mere 1.4%. So what does this mean? Because a lot of conversation about tourists is about paying our bills, and we'll get to that. But what is lost on many occasions is the implications of low visitors, especially in the off-season, to labor. Persons that depend on tourist arrivals to get a paycheck. That is why I raise this today. I raise this today, Mr. President, to show you that the importance of focusing on the off-season is to ensure that our thousands of workers in the tourism sector can consistently earn a decent living. It is something that is very concerning to me, Mr. President. And I'll tell you why. You are a businessman. You know about business. I know about business too. And in most or all other businesses, business owners and managers have to navigate the pressures of low seasons. We cannot send home workers. We cannot lay them off and bring them back when we think that it's time for them, when we think that sales are picking up. We do not have the liberty to do that in any other industry. But the tourist industry is separate and distinct. And they are allowed, Mr. President, to sacrifice their labor in non-peak times. So workers have to go to national insurance or get a significant reduction in their pay while trying to hold on to the job in the next few months when the season is going to be at its highest. So that is why there has to be a focus on growing the arrivals in non-peak times. That is why there has to be consideration to make sure that our people get paid. Because grocery bills do not go away. There's no concession to hotel workers when they're going to the grocery store because they're laid off. The cost of running their households do not go away. The cost at the pump, for sure, is not going away. The cost of sending their children to school is not going away, Mr. President. So it is very important that we seek to grow the industry as the Democratic Labour Party was doing before 2018 and up to 2018, Mr. President. And this government has failed the people of Barbados. They have failed the workers of this country in that way. So, Mr. President, it has also introduced the treatment of these workers in a way that will allow them not to be permanent employees, so they do not have security of tenure. These hoteliers now are moving to contract work, Mr. President, which does not benefit the employees in the long run. So it is in the best interest of any government to put their resources behind growing the tourism sector, not only because it contributes and it helps pay for some of these social services that the minister alluded to, but because it helps people to take care of themselves, because persons generally do not want to go to an MP's office to get help, to pay a bill, or to go to the grocery on a Sunday morning to put chicken on the table. Mr. President, What we also have to look at as it relates to the poor performance of trying to increase visitor arrivals is the fact that crime is out of control. And while the government may want to bury their heads in the sand, the reality is that that has a direct correlation to the amount of people that this country is going to attract, not only between November and April, but 12 months a year. Even our nationals that reside overseas that want to come back are concerned about this phenomenon, what is happening in this country today. So the government must put things in place to address the crime situation because it affects our tourism product. Mr. President, even when the government boasted about the Cricket World Cup in 2024, even when the government boasted about the Cricket World Cup in 2024, the numbers on the off-season of tourism did not improve. As I said, in 2024, they lag behind numbers that were 6 years prior. So even spending $100 million to bring Cricket World Cup here and putting out voice notes and videos saying that it was a success proved it was not a success. The numbers are there to prove it. Mr. President, Senator Nichols could get it and bring his numbers if he wants to defend that situation. Mr. President, there is also this statement that was made by the minister that tourism pays our bills. It's an interesting statement. It's true. It is true. And I'll tell you something, Mr. President. Mr. President, the contribution to our GDP as it relates to tourism does not, Mr. President, say that this government is doing a good job. It says that it's doing an extremely poor job. In 2018, Mr. President, tourism was contributing at least 13% to GDP. In 2016, 2017, and 2018, tourism contributed to 13% of GDP. In 2023, Mr. President, 2024, and up to September of 2025, tourism is now contributing less than 5% to GDP. If I round it, you will get to 5%, Mr. President. That is not a record to boast about. That does not qualify the statements of the minister that tourism pays our bills. That is saying that the government can no longer afford to pay its bills because it is not earning as it should in tourism. And that is why, Mr. President, this government has been forced to borrow foreign exchange to prop up its reserves because of this poor performance of this government. That is why when they boast that they have 6 months of foreign reserves, they will not tell the public that most of it is borrowed money and the taxpayers, the citizens, the residents are paying dearly every year to support this habit. This habit of borrowing and not letting the sectors perform in this country. I repeat, Mr. President, that in 2016, in 2017, in 2018, tourism contributed at least 13% to the gross domestic product of this economy. In 2023, 2024, And and September of 2025, it contributed 4.9% to the gross domestic product of the economy. Let the government dispute these facts, Mr. President.
Well, after you always share information.
Mr. President, the reality is that the policy of this government did not work. To get as much money as possible, to tax everything, including tourism, we are slowly becoming unattractive. Tourists are complaining on social media, TikTok, Instagram, about the high cost of everything when they come to Barbados. Sometimes you do a scroll 5 minutes and you see it, visitor to this island, popping up, talking about the price of items. And what do you think that is doing? That has a negative effect on those that are watching throughout the world. So the tax at the airport, Mr. President, the tax at the hotels, Mr. President, the tax at the restaurants, Mr. President, the tax at the bars, Mr. President, the tax the transportation, Mr. President, the tax the attractions, Mr. President, is not doing Barbados any good, especially when we in this country do not see where the tax dollars are going. And the leader of government business, Mr. President, also told Barbados this morning that when they go to certain restaurants, they will see some of these additional taxes on the receipts. In other words, Bajans do not even escape the wrath of this government trying to get more money. Because you go to a birthday function, you go to a retirement function, you carry your wife or your spouse or your girlfriend, your daughter's son for a nice meal, and you go pay more taxes. That is the reality that we have been facing since May 2018. And yet the potholes, grammar, as people will say. Hospital is in a state, Mr. President.
Let me hear Gregory on that.
Housing estates across this country shut down, not supporting low-income earners in this country, Mr. President. Schools are deplorable, Mr. President. So I don't mind the leader of government business talking about it pays our bills. They are unable to pay our bills because tourism is doing poor. Mr. President, I will ignore Senator. Mr. President, when we speak about tourism, there is a lot of discussion in recent days about Savvy on the Bay. And Mr. President, allow me to address the comment by Senator Nichols. Allow me to, Mr. President, I overheard.
Senator Nichols has not spoken in this debate. You cannot respond to anything that he has said. He has not said anything in this debate.
Mr. President, thank you, but I overheard a comment from the other side saying that we gave away. Mr.
Senator,
President, I am, he is.
And Senator, the only persons that have spoken in this debate is Senator Cummins and yourself. No one else has spoken, therefore there's nothing else to respond to.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Let me remind this chamber and the people of Barbados, and it may be said during the debate, the land that Savvy is situated on was sold by the Democratic Labour Party to a businessman. The land that the Afrexim Bank...
Senators, please, let the Honourable Senator be heard in silence.
The land that the Afrexim Bank owns was given away by this government. Mr. President, we didn't give away land. a businessman purchased land, Mr. President. The government gave away land to non-nationals, to persons that are running private entities that earn profits, millions and billions of dollars in profits, Mr. President. So everybody will get their say today. But Mr. President, I have been to Savi on the Bay numerous times. I parked either on property or opposite. I walked to the beach and nobody stopped me. There was nothing prohibiting me to get on the sand between my toes, to feel the sand between my toes. I went to the beach. I purchased the beach chairs with the umbrellas. And my children and I, my daughter specifically, will go into the sea. We will patronize the bar with a fruit punch. I would have a rum and coke. Yes. Mr. President, nobody stopped me from doing that. Nobody came and tell us, you got to leave, that this is private property. On other occasions, Mr. President, I have gone to Savi on the Bay and purchased food to eat, Mr. President. Nobody stopped me from parking. Nobody stopped me from asking me for permission, if I have permission to go and patronize one of the small business owners that operate there, Mr. President. What is this fascination that the government has with Savi on the Bay? Mr. President, and I heard the Minister of Housing try to defend it after public outcry about the small businesses will not be impacted. It's primarily about car park. Well, if they want car space, Mr. President, you just got to walk that stretch of land on Bay Street. There are properties on that same stretch, the old mobile station. What happened with that, Mr. President? The old fish market, a stone's throw away, Mr. President, is ripe for development. Why doesn't the government target that as a project? And there are lands further south, Mr. President, that are vacant, nothing going on. But the government is somehow targeting this specific plot of land that already has an existing business, is operating fully, and it boggles the mind not only of those who earn a living and a livelihood from it, but those of us who are watching and looking on. Mr. President, the BTMI was established before this government came to office. And the only thing I would say relative to some of the comments made by Minister Cummings and to Lisa Cummings, Mr. President, is that no one is questioning the ability of that department, the persons that work in that department. No one is questioning whether they're opening new markets or if they're doing good work or trying to do good work on behalf of the people of Barbados, because clearly there's room for significant improvement. But obviously the guidance has to come from the leadership of the government, Mr. President. However, I think it is still prudent for us to have audited financials, current audited financials for the BTMI, Mr. President, and all of these bodies. I'm not sure what is the latest audited financials. I'm sure that Minister Cummings can share with the chamber where they are at, but the last I saw was 2019 to 2020. But as I said, Mr. President, this is something, because it is still taxpayers' money. Not because you have now taxed at the airport, tax arrivals at the airport from both visitors and locals, it is still Barbados' revenue. So we need to know how that money is being spent, how that money is being allocated to specific projects, And if indeed there is a residual, because clearly, based on the numbers that are coming to Barbados, and based on the fees that are charged at the airport, that BTMI should receive at least $95 million a year. And if they are operating on a $75 million budget, there is excess. But I think the best way to see if this is really happening, Mr. President, and to watch the spending of this government is to get some audited financial statements, current audited financial statements, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, as I wrap up, I wanted to let this chamber know and to let Barbados know that this government did a poor job in tourism. And tourism is underperforming. Not only are they barely creeping past the numbers of 7 years ago, they have failed to increase the traffic outside of tourist season to protect our workers in the industry. And if anyone doesn't take away most of what I said, that is what I want most to resonate from this conversation, Mr. President, because tourism will always be with us. But it is the workers that always get the unfair treatment by having to be sent home in the down season, Mr. President, having to go to the NAS, having to earn nothing or less until the hotel reopens 6 or 7 months after. In some instances, Mr. President, there are workers who would like to be offered their packages. And while these hotels are redeveloping and taking months and years in some situations, they have these workers on a stipend. That's the best way to put it. And they cannot move on because they do not want to leave the years that they have invested in building the business and the tourism product. It is unfair. Something has to be done. All over Barbados, the private sector has to navigate outside of Christmas and outside of crop over, outside of the little peak season that your business may have. But you have to keep employment going. You have to treat your workers fairly. You have to make sure that they earn a decent income. But somehow in the tourism sector, there are other rules. And while those other rules may have had its place years ago, there is no place for that now, not when the cost of living has skyrocketed. Not when this government refused to reduce the price at the pump to some of those same persons for 18 months, although they were procuring oil at a reduced price, Mr. President. That is reality. So, Mr. President, the government has underperformed in tourism. We are in a position now where tourism is contributing just around barely 5% to the gross domestic product. And when they came to office, it was delivering at least 13% to GDP, earning real foreign exchange. This government is now borrowing foreign exchange, Mr. President, to beat their chest up. But you know what? While they borrow the foreign exchange, taxpayers are paying interest on that foreign exchange every year. And it is so bad that it tells a story that this government is not earning revenue, because when last year they were presented with loan repayments, they had to go and borrow $1 billion, $1 billion to repay that loan that became due, Mr. President. So it all tells a story of the performance of this government in totality, although we are focusing on the tourism sector today, Mr. President. Mr. President, with those few words, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Senator Maladou.
Thank you, Mr. President. We start by saying, let me get back to the matter before us. Let me start by saying that. Sir, I rise today, and I'm going to start by saying to you what I will say to you, then I will say it, and then I will tell you what I have said. You know how that goes. That's the way that I learned how to do presentations, is first you tell someone what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. So, Mr. President, sir, what I would like to say to you, actually, before I speak to the bill, I would like to take some time to agree with most everything that Senator Cummings, the Leader of Government Business, has said. I completely agree that the BRA's function is taxation. I completely agree that tourism pays a large part of the country's bills from the taxes that are earned from tourism. I completely agree that this bill is not introducing any new tax. It's about managing the collection process. And I completely agree that the BRA's rule, the purpose of this bill, the only thing it really changes is trying to require online platforms to remit these taxes. And that actually is the essence of the problem with this bill. Multiple problems, sir. And here is what I would like to say. These amendments will weaken the local operators. They're going to create enforcement loopholes, and it misplaces the liability in the levy system completely. This bill is poorly thought through. It is unimplementable. It is unenforceable, and it will harm the Barbados tourist industry. I regret to have to say that, and later on in my comments, I had hoped that we would avoid. I could have avoided saying that. And sir, when I speak on these matters, as you know, and maybe other senators in the room do, maybe some people who are listening do know, I have a little bit of experience with this. I've spent the last 30 years in this industry. I probably, at 61 years old, I grew up somewhat, not so much in the tourism industry, but in the real estate related industry. So, sir, why do I say, and how do I perhaps justify these very rough comments that I've just had to make, that it weakens local operators, creates enforcement loopholes, and misplaces the liability? Let me explain why by dealing directly with the bill. Sir, what this bill does is it widens the scope with a very broad description of an online marketplace. The definition then requires those online marketplaces to register with the BRA, regardless of where they operate. And sir, perhaps I could spend 2 minutes, maybe for those who don't understand where these are, to explain a bit how this has developed. There was a time going back in the late 50s into the 60s in Barbados as tourism developed that you would get people coming to Barbados and they would make a decision and say, I'm going to buy a house in Barbados. This looks great. I'm going to spend 3 and 4 months here. And then what would happen, sir, sometime after that is they would get back to wherever that home country was. It might be, back in those days, it could be Venezuela, actually, because a lot of wealth came here from Venezuela. They would get back and then they would say, but who is paying the staff? Who's cleaning the pool? Who's cutting the grass? So that developed into these property managers. And later on, making a very long story short, that same property owner would say, but hold on a minute, when I am not there, I got all these bills to pay. Why you don't rent the property for me? And we developed this kind of online, well, not online at that point in time, it was a one-to-one relationship between the guest, the property manager, and they would stay. And that's how this was developed. And that online marketplace now is just a digital version of how those were marketed. You still need a property manager in Barbados or a property owner who is going to deliver the service, and you have a guest coming from overseas. And that guest has always had to pay whatever the relevant taxes are to do with that property, to do with that rental, they have to pay. Now, in the past, prior to this piece of legislation, the person responsible ultimately for paying that tax over was either the owner themselves or the manager who was appointed to it. What this does is say, no, no, no. You could be 7 people up the chain, have no relationship at all with Barbados. You don't know who the owner of that property is. You don't know who the manager of that property is, but you are in the online space and you're marketing. You're marketing this property and you collect a rent for it. You now have a responsibility to pay over a tax for whom you don't know the owner, you don't know who the taxpayer is, but you have to collect the tax. That's what this is telling you to do. So you are asking for, and I want to understand, it's not Airbnb and VRBO and the 2 or 3 that you may know about. There are over 500 online marketing websites for these, say 500 of them, okay? And I will also say that the vast majority of property owners in Barbados are compliant with all of these levies. The vast majority are. So this legislation is targeted at the minority, but it changes the regulation for everyone. Let me move on to some of the other problems. As I said, it introduced in Section 10A the payment and collection of the levy. It shifts from the collection of remittance to the online marketplace, including the offshore platforms. And in that same section, it provides for a lien on the property if it is not being paid. So understand the disconnect, sir, that we are creating here. We have a person who may be 4, 5, 6 people up the chain who has no relationship with the owner of the property in Barbados. They collect a tax. They don't remit it because they don't know who to remit it to. They don't know the TIN number. They have no relationship with BRA, but they collect the tax. When you learn about it in Barbados that it's not being collected, the BRA has the right to put a lien on your property. That has never before happened in Barbados. Never before. We cannot have a situation where you disconnect the person who is collecting the tax from how do you remit it. It can't happen. It moves the filers from being bi-monthly today to monthly. That's in Section 11. So that increases the record, keeping our obligations on it. For the larger companies that I'm familiar with, probably not a problem because they're doing this regularly and they got accountants and they got people working for them and they got systems and so on. But for many of the people in the shared economy levy, this burden of financial reporting is going to be impossible and unenforceable to put on them. But it does make them now non-compliant and operating outside the law. They just can't do it, although the law says you have to do it. So I guess we won't enforce it. As I said before, sir, there's no increase in the tax rate. I have no objection with the tax rate. That's a battle that was fought and lost or fought and won, whatever you call it, some time ago. This has been the tax 10 and 2.5% being taxed for a while. The industry has adjusted to it. Barbados is an expensive destination in comparison. I'm not in any way debating the taxes. They haven't changed, as Senator Cummings correctly said. There's no change to taxation. But what there is exactly what Senator Cummings said, is a change in the methodology for collecting it, a process. It is unworkable in practice. Extraterritorial registration and enforcement, as I said, there are 400 to 500 others, have no Barbados presence. How does the BRA, or how does the minister intend for the BRA to reach these 400 or 500 people, provide them with TIN numbers and provide for a mechanism for the reporting? And what problem are you solving? That problem does not exist today. The problem that exists today is that you have people who are not registered, who are renting their property and are not collecting the levy, or they're collecting the levy and not paying it over. None of this addresses that, sir. This legislation in no way addresses that. Because all of those rogue operators today will continue to be rogue operators. But all the good operators now are going to be moved completely out of the system. Because whereas today, in one of the larger rental companies, or the majority of rental companies, they work directly for the villa owner, they know who the TIN number is, they work directly with BRA, they're a Barbados company with Barbados directors, and they're paying over the shared economy levy. That's how it is today. And if they don't do it, you have all of those options. You can deal with the directors, you can deal with the company, you can deal with the property itself, all of those things are available to you. As soon as you go and you think that the online marketplace which could be based in Indonesia, it could be in Japan, it could be in China, it could be in Russia, it could be anywhere. You have no idea where the domicile of that marketing place is, and you're saying that they're the ones responsible for remitting the tax? Sorry, sir. It's impractical. As I said before, the vast majority of these platforms, they have no relationship to the owner of the property. They do not know who the ultimate taxpayer is. They have no idea who they're renting for. They might have a relationship 2 or 3 people down the line with the local operator. They might do, but it's very far removed. So fundamentally, this legislation fundamentally breaks the one-to-one relationship that has existed forever between the taxpayer and the BRA. We now have an army of 400 to 500 of these online people who have a responsibility to collect this 12.5% tax, but we have no way of enforcing that that money will actually get back to Barbados. Where it is today, we know exactly how we're going to do it. And yes, we need to go after those few rogues who may not be, or may be collecting the tax and not paying, or may not be charging the tax. There's a different way of approaching that. So a couple other unintended consequences, I would say. As it stands today, we are able, in the shared economy, in the villa rentals, in the Airbnb, wherever it is that you might operate, because remember, it might be a little operator who has a cottage in their yard and that they're renting it out on Airbnb. So they have a one-to-one relationship with Airbnb. They put their property up on Airbnb, and they take some rentals when they want, and they collect the money from Airbnb. The US dollars, the foreign exchange flows into them. They pay all their taxes. They're legitimate operators. They do the right thing. So we know how much foreign exchange comes in. They get the foreign exchange. They get the cash flow. As it stands today, now they will hold on to it for 2 months, and then they file it after 2 months later, and they pay over that amount. This now changes that completely, you know. They'll never see that money. Airbnb gets to keep it. I apologize to Airbnb, you're not the only one. There are many, many of them. The online operators get to keep it. They get to keep that money and pay it over. The actual person who provided the service never will see the tax. They don't get the benefit of it coming in and flowing through. They don't get the benefit of recording it. They don't get the benefit of the foreign exchange earnings. They get nothing from it, because it goes from the operator online, somebody overseas, who we don't know, who has no relationship with the BRA, who we have no way of enforcing what they do, and supposedly to come straight into government. So we have no way of recognizing it. As Senator Cummings says, we don't actually know, but in our estimates, I being a person in the industry, if we do some statistical looking around, we think there are about 6,000 properties that are operating in the shared economy, villa market, vacation rental market. You choose what term you want to describe them as. About 6,000 of them. Even if you said on average there are 2 bedrooms, that's 12,000 rooms. It's a lot of things we're talking about. And the vast majority of them are compliant. We know that as well based upon all the statistics you can look at, and you can extrapolate numbers as to what it's going to be. We also know that some of them are not compliant. We also know that this industry has grown at a rate of 4x, 4 times what the hotels have grown at, both in terms of revenue, in terms of rooms that we have. It employs investment in the construction side. I don't need to go through all of that. It's a very valuable industry to us. So all of these things, though, this particular piece of legislation is now putting another obstacle as to how someone as an online tour operator will say, well, should I do business with Barbados? So even if they are a legitimate operator, and I think the vast majority of them are, they've now, with this legislation, they've got to now beef up their own way of doing this. They've got to decide, how easy is it to do business in Barbados? Because before I take on a property onto my website that's going to be advertised, I can no longer allow you to do that directly, because I need to verify your TIN, the tax information number. I need to understand how I'm going to remit that money to the BRA. I need to be able to understand how I'm going to reconcile it. So you're adding a layer of burden onto these online tour operators who actually in many cases, these are digital platforms. There's no human to deal with. You ever tried to call, I'm going to call their name again, that big firm? You ever tried to call that big firm and say to them, I have a problem, I've arrived and I can't find my key. Good luck. These are digital platforms. There's nobody there to talk to do it. So you think that if you don't have people to talk to there, you're going to be able to get all this level of information, to get the data through to the BRA so as to know. So what are you going to end up doing? You're going to put a lien on my property because somebody overseas has rented my property and has not remitted the tax? I don't know that. You told it was their responsibility, not my responsibility. This legislation said it was their responsibility. Don't put a lien on my property because they didn't pay your tax. Sir, this makes no sense. I was going to talk a bit about the fairness and equity regarding the actual shared economy levy, but Senator Cummings has done a very good job of explaining that. The shared economy levy on the villas is unlimited. It's a percentage, whereas the room rate levy is on a dollar value that caps out. So really and truly, just so you know, those villas, the high end of it, are paying 10, 15, 20 times more than a hotel room that you may pay to, because you could stay at a hotel room on these fancy hotel rooms for $800, $900, $1,000 a night, you pay $10 a head. Whereas in the villas, there's no cap, it's a percentage, okay? It'll be 10 times that, it'll be 100. But I'm not gonna go down that road, nor am I gonna go down the road with the unsettled VAT returns that came about when we changed and we deregistered all of these shared economy properties. We still have millions, tens of millions, I actually don't know, it might be hundreds of millions of dollars in VAT refunds that are due to the industry that still have not been paid. We've been through 2 computer systems at the BRA. They can't reconcile it, they can't pay it. They don't know what to do. But this is a change that we think is appropriate. So, sir, the last thing I would like to comment on, and I guess maybe and truly if we listen to nothing else that I have to say, maybe this will be it. What troubles me most about this is not that it's a bad piece of legislation. It's not that. It's how did we get here? As I mentioned, sir, I am the owner of one of the larger companies in this space. I have not been consulted with. My team has not been consulted with. I spoke to every CEO of a large villa operator, shared economy levy, vacation rental. I myself asked the question, were you consulted with about this legislation, the practicality of it? The answer was no, sir. No one's been consulted. So I picked up the phone and called the BHTA. I said, Mr. BHTA, tell me, and the chairman of the Villa Group, were you consulted about this legislation? No, sir. They're not consulted either. So is it any wonder that if you don't know about this industry, you don't consult with the people who know? It is the most important, according to Senator Cummings, one of the places where we get most of our tax that runs Barbados, but the way that we're going to do it is introduce legislation that we have not even consulted with the people who operate in it. It continues to me to be an exercise in creating frustration that was unnecessary. Unnecessary. A few conversations, this was going in the right direction. Let's collect the tax from those who are not paying. I agree with you 100%, 100%. This is not the piece of legislation to do it. This makes matters worse, creates more frustration. So, sir, I would hope, there's nothing much you can do now. I can voice my concern at this point in time here when it gets to this point. I would have loved to have voiced my concern earlier, perhaps guided it in some way, but that is no longer available to us. So, I don't know exactly how to finish, other than maybe 2 things. Other than 2 things. I will repeat what I said. That unfortunately, these amendments weaken the local operators. I've demonstrated that. It creates significant enforcement loopholes, which I've demonstrated. And it misplaces the liability, because the liability should be on the owner of the property who has the responsibility that you're going to put the lien on if they don't pay their tax. It should require them to be the ones who collect the tax, who they know what the tax is and to pay it over. And if they don't, you put a lien on their property. It completely misplaces that entire thing. So these amendments, because they shift the liability to the offshore parties, because they break the reconciliation, the ability to reconcile on these, because the burden then is now going to be falling on our operators who are already compliant, but it will make no difference to those who are not compliant, it risks real economic harm to us. And as such, sir, while this is another good example to me as to why I've spoken in here before about our need for tax simplification. Because when I get up to speak on it, or Senator Cummins, or other senators who are knowledgeable in their particular area or industry, the complexity of our tax regime, the complexity of all these taxes we're collecting and how to pay it over, etc., is getting more and more. And what we need is a tax simplification exercise to make this easier for all to do business. And this certainly is not. And therefore, sir, with those many words that I have given you, I regret to say that I am not in support of this passage, and I thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Mallory. Senator Trent.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, members of this honorable chamber. I rise in support of this legislation. And I rise this afternoon, hoping to be brief, because I simply rise to add some numbers in instances where I believe that there has been I don't want to say an attempt to mislead. And possibly because of the time that we are in, it may be politically convenient to ignore context and to use numbers in a way that benefit us. But I hope to use some sources and to share those with you, because sometimes I believe that we are asked whether we are going to believe facts or fictions. And so when we talk about tourist arrivals, let us add some numbers over the past few years. In 2008, tourist arrivals, and this is according to the Barbados Statistical Service, those were 566,763. In 2013, 508,520. In 2018, 681,107, 700 in 2024, just over 700,000. And in 2025, as of September, it would have been 538,000 long-stay arrivals, which was up by 5.5%. And so what we have seen, with the exception of those COVID years, and after post-COVID, having to catch back, as we would say ourselves, we have seen an increase. And this is, of course, in direct contradiction to what was shared before. But like I said, I have told you where this information can be found, and a quick search would give you these numbers. And so the suggestion that tourism no longer accounts for more than 10% of our GDP is also incorrect based on the central bank, which noted in 2025 that it was around 17.5%. But you can find these numbers online in the report. The other thing is that when we talk about hotels...
Point of order, Mr. President.
Senator Walters, what's the point of order?
Mr. President, since the Honorable Senator is directing the chamber to the Central Bank report, can she be more specific in where she found out those numbers that she referred to?
He referred to numbers.
Honorable Senators. Honorable Senators, please. Senator Trim, yes, you're citing the figures. Let's indicate the date of the report, please, as is required.
So the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate notes, that's the report, that 17.5 of estimated contributions as at 2025 were reported by the Central Bank. The Central Bank report of 2025, the review of Barbados' economy in 2024, also cites those numbers, like I said, and we have a growth of 12.1% in 2024 for tourism.
Mr. President,
What's the point of order?
point of order, Mr. President. I'm not sure if, I'm not, the senator is misleading the chamber. She had made a statement that her numbers are in contradiction to what I presented, Mr. President. I presented numbers that said the contribution of tourism to the gross domestic product. So she is speaking about growth and other measures, Mr. President. Just to be clear, I stated, Mr. President, that the contribution of tourism to the GDP was 13% in 2018 and is now at 5% over the last 3 years. And my source, if the chamber wants to know, the honorable senators on the other side, is the Central Bank of Barbados.
And in what year? What was the date? What was the date of that report? What was the date of that report?
Mr. President, they should ask her source.
No, I'm asking you.
Mr. President, you have the September 2025 report from the Central Bank and Appendix 2, GDP by sector and activity. That is one report, Mr. President.
And it's not the one that speaks to the figure that is under contention?
No, Mr. President, it spoke to my figures. I am saying that I can defend my figures, Mr. President, and if the senator can defend hers appropriately, we would appreciate it.
And all that's required here, I'm not here to arbitrate the right or wrong, but one has to cite the source, and once what you're saying is consistent with the source, then the argument will be over interpretation. Yes. Please continue, Senator Trim.
Okay. So as I continue, Mr. President, it's not my intention to engage in the kind of behavior that the honorable member seems to be trying to take today. That is not my intention. And so as I continue, it is clear that the analysis being received continues to be convenient and for specific purposes. When we talk about what has been done for workers, we also see that there has been the establishment of a national minimum wage, and that minimum wage will increase annually to align itself with inflation and still allow for the Minimum Wage Board to meet. The Labor Concessions Act also seeks to protect workers within this sector. And so the work that is being done in tourism is not simply to benefit hoteliers and those who have accommodations, but also to ensure that Barbadians and those who work in the sector are protected. The other thing, Mr. President, is that there was commentary on Cricket World Cup. Central Bank, on July 30th, 2024, published that the World Cup led to the highest increase in visitor arrivals for the month of June, excluding the pandemic recovery period, and that the heightened tourism demand was met by an expansion in airlift seating capacity, which saw an additional 17,000 seats, a 24% increase compared to the same period in 2023, to suggest that there has not been growth, to suggest that there has not been improvement, to suggest that there has not been progress, ignores these things.
Point of order, Mr. President.
What's the point of order?
Senator is misleading the chamber if she continues to say that, to suggest that there's not been progress and growth. I was clear, Mr. President, in referring the numbers in 2024 to that of 2018, not to that of the previous year, 2023. And I was saying, Mr. President, that compared to 2018, this government, in the months between May and August, have not been able to increase the arrivals to Barbados when compared to 2018.
Right. Your perspective is noted. Senator Trim may have another perspective, and that's perfectly correct. The other point is that you mentioned 2018 and 2024. The senator is citing other years. Please press on, Senator Trim.
Mr. President, once again, I said it might be politically convenient when I started to say that you speak without context. We are speaking in a post-pandemic world, a world that globally, across the world, has reported shifts in spending habits, in the way persons travel, in the priorities of families, in the priorities of young people, and in the way that we do business and engage with each other. And so to compare to 2018, pre-COVID, pre-Ashfall, pre-the Democratic Labour Party, is to purposefully use it and what is happening politically for your purposes. And so, like I said before, it is not my intention, as clearly seems to be the intention of the honorable member, to engage in a back and forth. And so, like I said, this report by the Central Bank contradicts the idea that World Cup was not beneficial to Barbados. It contradicts the idea that when you consider things like the investments in places like Oistins, Pelican Village, and Hayman's Market, which are used by Barbadians daily, that it did not benefit us in a way that matters and still matters, the improvement to Kensington. And we have to be able, in the midst of all of this, not to seek to mislead persons for our political benefit. There is a cost to Barbados, and there will always be a cost for various things. There was a cost during COVID. There has been a cost. There was a cost with the Ashfall. Natural disasters cost us. The recent military strikes cost us. And tourism, and like was said by the leader of government business, the additional burden that it often places on our resources also has a cost. And there has to be a way in which we seek to ensure that these costs do not further burden Barbadians. And this is our way of doing just that. And so I sought to add some context and some clarity and some numbers, and I was glad to be able to have the member share where he got his information from, because we did not hear it previously. And so with those few words, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Trim. If there are no more speakers, please wrap up, Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. No, Mr. President, I want to thank the honorable members who have spoken, certainly starting with Senator Malalou. Senator Malalou, I undertake to take your concerns back. I will, as is my custom, whenever I respond to queries that have been raised by members of this chamber, especially on matters relating to process and structure. I understand that from your presentation, you would have wanted to have an engagement with the officials, and I undertake to take that back and to see what their feedback is and to give that feedback to you, and to, at the same time, also ask and pass the communication on not just to the Ministry of Finance with responsibility for the BRA, but also to the Ministry of Tourism, who interfaces principally with the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association. So I will give that commitment here now. Now, Senator Walters, my friend Senator Walters, who brings more bluster than substance on any given day. So let me take a moment and thank Senator Roshana Trim for attempting to correct the record. Now, you know, Mr. President, I know that we are in a season where people are going to try to, as was just said by Senator Trim, score cheap political points, shouting, bringing past parts of information, linking it to something else, ignoring facts and hoping that the rest of us forget along with you. That has become characteristic of the honorable member, and we're accustomed to that, so we understand it, Mr. President. We know there's more form than substance there, and we're acceptant of that. But let me attempt to correct the record on substance. In 2018, Barbados had a banner year for tourism, the highest number of long-stay visitors and short-stay visitors and cruise visitors on record. In 2019, in February of 2019, the world had its very first COVID case in this region. And our sector, I don't know if the honorable member teleported to Mars during that period and was not here on Earth with the other 191 countries in the planet, but the world stopped, to our certain knowledge. And all tourism arrivals, especially in tourism-dependent economies, and I cannot be intimidated, so you could try to talk over me, but it is impossible to intimidate me, so try as you might. So the world stopped in 2019, February. I know this, Mr. President, because I was chairman of the Bridgetown Port, and I went out in a pair of 3-foot 3-inch heels out on a tug to bring in the first cruise ship that came in this country with a COVID case on it. I don't know where Senator Walters was, but I know he wasn't with the cruise workers then. I know he wasn't with the port workers who were worried about the first case that was coming into this country then. I didn't see him in my own 2 eyes. I don't know where Senator Walters or the Democratic Labour Party was, hiding behind everybody else's coattails in fear for COVID as it came. But I know that this government made decisions that other countries in this region even did not make, Mr. President. I know that. I know where I was on the day that the first Carnival ship came into this country. I was at LESC at a conference under the Commonwealth Secretariat. I don't know where he was. But I know that we got a call, and we mobilized and went to the Bridgetown Port so that that ship with Barbadians could come into this Bridgetown Port. I know what it was for workers, tourism workers, that I don't have to come and score cheap political points over because I stood with them. I don't know where Senator Walters was. I know what it was, Mr. President, to stand in the Bridgetown Port with the men and the women in that port who had to go and navigate a ship for the first time with COVID and they'd never seen it in their lives, and convince them to put that fear aside and to be humanly vulnerable to that which was unknown and to go and bring that ship into port. I know what it was, Mr. President. Me, Lisa Shane. What's all craziness are we hearing, Mr. President? Me, Lisa. Mr. President, when those workers decided that they were going out to bring in the ship, Barbados is a tug-operated port, so the ships can't come into our harbor without the tug going out. I remember what I had on deliberately, Mr. President, because I was not the leader to send men out to do things I was not willing to do myself. So if they went out to sea to bring in that ship, I got on that tug with them in a black pencil skirt and 3-inch heels. It didn't matter what I had on, I went with them. I know what it was personally, Mr. President. I don't know where Senator Walters was, talking about tourism workers and this government, Mr. President. What are we experiencing in here today? This grandstanding with no substance, form over substance, Mr. President. He has no basis and no moral authority to speak about tourism workers in this country. Mr. President, when this country was dealing with that ship, I know what it was, Barbadians. I know what it was to see the faces of Barbadians on that ship, on balconies looking out to port, Barbados up ahead, the port just there, but knowing what it is to have been turned away from 3 different ports. First port, don't come in here. Second port, don't come in here. Third port, don't come in here. And our Bajans were on that ship, Mr. President. I know what it is to get close to that ship and see the faces of Barbadians wondering, can we come home? Will our country let us come in here? And Barbados with a prime minister who said yes. Yes. While everybody else was rejecting their own citizens. I know what it is, Mr. President. All right then. I'm advocating, Mr. President, I know what it was to move 22,000 people through this Bridgetown port so that they could get home to their families. Tourism workers, me, Lisa. No, Mr. President, not me, Lisa. I have nothing to be ashamed about. I know what it was. I was there. And when I look back to my left, and when I look back to my right and to my far distance, I never saw Ryan Walters, never saw Senator Walters anywhere in sight. So I don't know where he was, if he was icing it out and planning to ice all over the Hubbardston Terminal. I don't know what he was doing, but I know he didn't check in for tourism workers. I know. I know he was probably elsewhere, but I know where he was not. I know what it is, Mr. President, when the first set of persons from other countries, aside from those 22,000 people that we moved through this country in the port, I know what it is for a prime minister in this country to say yes, not just to our own, but to other people whose countries shut them out. I know what it is for us to put them up in our hotels. I know what it is, Mr. President, to have a lab overwhelmed because of the sheer volume of people, and for a year and a half, this country shut down. We were not on Mars, so nobody can stand in this country, and worse yet, in this chamber, and attempt to give what they would want us to see as a serious contribution, and attempt to convince anybody in here that the world did not shut down for a year and a half for something called COVID. May we never see COVID again in our lifetime. May we never see it again. But I know we went through it. And I know
On the point
what
of order,
it was.
Mr. President.
Yes, what's the point of
How
order?
does this grandstanding change the fact that the Barbados Labour Party government under Senator Lisa Cummings is underperforming in tourism arrivals?
Senator Walters, that's a speech.
Through the port.
Senator Worrell, please, that's not a point of order. You're making a speech that you did not make before. Please. Senator Cummings, please continue.
So, sir, thank you very much, because the Honourable Senator has just managed to grace us with his presence and has attempted to speak where he had not before, and I want to take a moment, Mr. President, a sober moment. This chamber is called the Senate of Barbados. The other place is called the House. I don't know how members of the Democratic Labour Party behave where they live, but they have to respect the rules and procedures of this chamber. And
On a point of order, Mr. President, but every single senator that speaks in this chamber respect the rules of this chamber. We know how to operate in this chamber. We do not need to take a lecturing from Senator Cummings.
Thank you, Senator Worrell, and I will ensure that the rules are followed. Please continue, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and the lecture will continue because, to my certain knowledge, the president of the chamber is the president of the chamber and must not be shouted over by the member for the Democratic Labour Party. The president must not be shouted over. The president and the speaker in the other place must be respected. This shouting over this president and the speaker is out of order. It has to come to an end, but it will come to an end sooner rather than later. Now, Mr. President, back to the presentation that I'm making. I want to continue my response to Senator Walters' presentation. Senator Walters also spoke about the tourism sector's performance, and he neglected to speak to the fact that it was interrupted by a year and a half of COVID. I want also...
I was going to give you some silence so you could be heard.
I'm okay, Mr. President. They can't intimidate me, you know, Mr. President. I'm good. I am good, Mr. President. I don't need silence down there. The Democratic Party can carry on as they wish. Mr. President, I want to continue to give my response at this point. The central bank reports that I am looking at, and this is specifically speaking about January to September, and I'm going to come to September and the second one later. So this is October 2025. Long stay arrivals rose over the period of 9 months by 5.5%. And I want to specifically draw attention, I put on the record, this is the Central Bank quarterly report at 2025 October. I want specifically to draw attention, I'm going to go to a specific, well, it doesn't have page numbers, I'm using the PowerPoint presentation given. But the title of the slide that I'm using, and I want to enter into the record, was Long Stay Arrivals Rose by 5.5%, 9-month comparisons, January to September. Mr. President, this particular slide I'm using because it goes back to 2010, and it brings us all the way up to 2025. In 2010, we have a market assessment, market by market. It tells us United States, Europe, CARICOM, the United Kingdom, and Canada. It shows, Mr. President, what the world knows, that in 2020 through 2021, the world stopped and arrivals vanished. It plummeted sharply in 2020 to 2021. And as it plummeted sharply, Mr. President, it rose just as sharply between 2021 and 2022. I believe, Mr. President, that we saw here from the green slide is United Kingdom. That was the fastest recovery market based on that PowerPoint slide in 2021, recovering to 2018 levels by 2021 and continuing on that trajectory in 2022. We saw, Mr. President, in 2021, also heading into 2022, a 12% increase in arrivals coming from the United States market. So the 2022 arrivals numbers for long-stay visitors saw a 12% increase. From the United Kingdom, I spoke about that already. From the European Union, Mr. President, it rose also and it kept par largely with the UK market. And we also saw a recovery, the same, all markets plummeted in 2020 to 2021. They fell dramatically in 2020, dropped further in 2021, the COVID years, and then increased sharply from 2021 to 2022 to recover at 2019 levels, as we have seen. And the Canadian market, we saw that continue to increase. This is the Central Bank report of October 2025, and it captures the period from 2010 to 2025. I did not start at 2018 or 2019. I went as far back on purpose, Mr. President, as 2010 to be able to show the trajectory. We saw in the midst there between 2010 and 2020 a flattening in many of the markets. Certainly, we saw the UK market have a softening in 2012, 2013. We saw that decline begin in 2011, and then a gradual recovery begin in 2014 to reach the high that Senator Walters spoke about in 2018. In 2019, again, to my certain knowledge, by the time the world shut down and the cruise industry in Barbados came to a grinding halt, in February of that year, Barbados was on target to exceed even the 2018 year because we had seen around 800,000 arrivals in 2018. By 2019, February, we were on target for over 900,000 visitors, and had we not had shut down for COVID, we would have had an increase by the time the tourism season ended. Now, I wanted to enter that into the record. The second thing that I want to address, Mr. President, is the low season. Barbados has never had a high season during the summer. It has never been a part of the characteristic of Barbados's tourism market. It did not start in 2018. It did not end in 2019 when we had to close the sector. And it has not just started, it didn't start before, but here's what happened, Mr. President. Here are the facts. This government came to office, and made a determination that we needed to be able to ensure that we had a year-round tourism economy. And I'm not asking about this, I'm not guessing about it, I know this to my certain knowledge. I have sat in rooms and around tables engaging with the partners. And I know what it is for the cruise industry to say to Barbados in response to our request. We don't live in a bubble, Mr. President, and like children, everything we want, we can't get. But it doesn't mean that we're not going to go after it. And so we had a discussion, Mr. President, with the industry. We're not children, we're big people here, live in the real world. And we sat across the table from the cruise industry, and we started to have a discussion with them. What would it take for Barbados to have summer cruising? And you know, one of the things that they said to us, persons who are leaving cold climates typically want to come to warm climates in their winter, making the Caribbean attractive. Persons, however, who cannot come to go to other jurisdictions, other exotic jurisdictions like we are, they want to experience it in the summer months when it is also warm where they are. And so a lot of the cruise lines, they move their vessels to the Mediterranean, and they are cruising on the Mediterranean because you can't do it in the winter. And so in terms of their scheduling and their placement of ships, they said it is not likely for us to be able to have an extensive summer season. So what did Barbados do? Barbados then decided, okay, so while we may not have all of the larger vessels, there is an opportunity in some of the smaller luxury vessels where you may not have volume, but you may have quality. And by that, I simply mean, while you may not have the vessels that bring 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 or 7,000 passengers, you may have those that bring 1,500 passengers, but they're high-spending passengers, thereby contributing a significant percentage as if you had higher numbers. And that was what Barbados then set out to do in the summer months. The Prime Minister also set about, and I believe Senator Reid knows this better than many of us, to ensure we had a 52-week calendar in the year so that year on year on year, month on month on month, people were able to identify what was happening in the country and be able to pair our destination marketing from the BTMI to that. We Gathering was a part of those things, bringing home the diaspora, bringing our own people home. We also had the ability, I believe that Senator Walters had an opportunity if he wanted, not Walters, Senator Worrell, if he wanted to speak, to do so. I'm not sure why he left, why he was absent from the chamber for the majority of the morning, but if he wanted to speak, he could have, Mr. President. So I would like not to have him co-author my closing with me. No, Mr. President, let's move on. I also recall, Mr. President, very clearly that the Prime Minister, aside from the 52-week calendar, we also had the Food and Rum Festival. We've had any number of initiatives that have been introduced. We had Carry Festa. We had all of the various activities where people came into the country to be able to create a 52-week calendar for Barbados. Crop over. We talked, Mr. President, about influencers. Again, puerile commentary, Mr. President. I remember, I am not a marketer. I am not a marketer. I don't know anything about what the discipline of marketing is. But I know that once upon a time, PR and comms and marketing was driven by things like press releases and just press conferences and so on. The world of marketing, the marketers tell me, has changed. And so yes, bringing in a person who, I'll tell you a joke, Mr. President. I can't always manage social media. I really can't. So I never understand persons. There are times where I genuinely take a break. I don't go look, I don't want to see. I actually curate what I follow on social media, travel, that kind of stuff, because I want to be able to control what I consume or what I take into my spirit. So, but there are people who I may not understand, but God bless them. They live and breathe social media. Every part of their lives, they post on social media. Everything they do, everywhere they go. And it blows my mind that there are people who follow them to be able to see when next they post. And they have millions of followers who follow them and want to replicate what their lives look like on social media. That is apparently the power of influencers. I had a young woman say to me the other day, I said to her, she had gotten laid off from her job, and I was talking to her about what she was looking to do, what is your ultimate dream? I want to be a content creator. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. I said, but explain to me, what does that mean? She says, I want to be able to just do social media and prepare content that people are following. I said, so what does that mean? But they tell me that people do that for a living and they make a ton of money. They make bank. That's a real career now in a different generation. So I, in my newly minted 50-year-old self, can't look at what I thought was marketing in my era. I have to look at a younger demographic and a younger generation. And so yes, any government or any business that is serious about extending its influence across borders, who is not engaging with influencers, they're missing the mark in a modern generation of what marketing looks like. I may not understand it, I don't. But apparently it is a real thing and it is highly effective. I had to take the time then, Mr. President, to start to follow some of them on travel blogs, in particular when I was in the port and in tourism. And it's amazing. They will tell you, I have just reached the million number mark. I'm like, who does that? But they get paid for the number of people who follow them, and every post that they make goes viral, and people are sharing these posts, and they go everywhere. It's incredible. But that is what is important about influencers. So let's not attempt to minimize what government has done in terms of bringing influencers from different markets to this country. And I also know for a fact, that when these persons come to the country, the BTMI in particular spends time vetting their following, if it fits with a demographic or segment that the country is going after, if they're operating in a market that you have specific interest in, that's what they do. And that is part of the digital strategy. This is not the 1980s or the 1990s anymore, or even the 2000s. This is 2026, and that is the way of marketing in this environment. Then, Mr. President, finally, I also want to respond to the issue that was raised about, I made a note here, about the I want to make the point about the BTMI in particular. BTMI, Mr. President, the officers in our overseas markets, I said this in my presentation, are the same officers who were there in 2018, Mr. President. I went and met them, I have left them, and they're still there, Mr. President, and they are working and building capability. So what we're seeing, Mr. President, in the numbers that I showed earlier, going from 2010 to 2025, those officers have increased significantly, and you've seen the increase in the US market, and that has been driven very heavily by the officers based in the North American market, in the Panamanian market, driving business to this country and driving airlift and making sure that there is a consequential increase in the number of seats. So, Mr. President, I don't want to get into the back and forth about whether or not the tourism sector has performed. That the tourism sector has performed is not in question. The last thing I want to say is this, Mr. President. There are countries in the region that we keep being compared to. But I want to also make the point here, Mr. President, as I close, that Barbados recovered after many other countries because many of our people, y'all remember, and Mr. President, do you remember? I'm not sure if you remember it, but I remember it well. We actually had a national conversation about how Barbadians in the immediate aftermath of COVID and during COVID were so uncomfortable with persons entering our country, and they were very unhappy with the fact that the government kept the airport open. The airport never closed. Who are these people? I know what it was, Mr. President, to have to move persons from the port in the dead of the night when the roads were largely closed under police escort because Barbadians were so uncomfortable with the idea of all these people. I know what it is to get a call, Mr. President, from someone in the Massacre Park in Warrens because a visitor had been accosted by a local who said, I want to come and bring in COVID all in my country. Barbados wanted restrictions in ways because our country never shut down our borders. And so Barbados had to move at a pace with COVID testing and dedicated facilities in ways that no other country in the region implemented. That's a fact. They just kept their borders closed. We didn't. And so, of course, it means that there's going to be a comparable difference between the two, between Barbados and other jurisdictions. Does it mean, Mr. President, that Barbados has not recovered? I think the central bank data coming from the report that I just quoted has said that it has. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The Honorable, the Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Question is that, no.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 1 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 1 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, as we just stood clause 1 part, I beg to move that we make an adjustment. Obviously, this was 2025, it is now 2026, and I beg to move that 2025 be amended to now read 2026.
The question is that clause 1 do stand part after amendment of the language to change the year 2025 to 2026. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clauses 2 through 10.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 2 through 10 stand part.
The question is that clauses 2 through 10 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? No. The ayes have it.
Clauses 11 through 15.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clauses 11 through 15 do now stand part.
The question is that clauses 11 through 15 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
First schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be now the first schedule to the bill. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The second schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be now the second schedule to the bill. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as a Tourism Levy Amendment Act 2026.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Tourism Levy Amendment Act 2026. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting be suspended for lunch until 2:30 in the afternoon.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 2:30 p.m. today. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This sitting is accordingly suspended until 2:30 p.m. today.